Tonight, we open the gates of Fairmont Crest to enter its biggest mystery, Bill's wife, the woman standing between love and power. What exactly did she do in the chain of events that plunged the entire community into chaos? A marital addendum that once bound management rights to a Dupree-linked fund suddenly loses its signature, a clandestine meeting with Andre right before Bill exposed his past, an emergency power of attorney video in Vanessa's hands ready to flip the board, an old birth certificate revealing a pre-marriage child that could tip the balance of assets, and a pill bottle appearing on the very night Bill lost control after that final drink. Was it desperate protection or a calculated takedown? A solo scheme or a covert alliance? Join me as we thread the clues, decode the motives, and confront the hardest question: if the truth can't save anyone, who will be sacrificed first? Fairmont Crest sank beneath the dingy amber of the street lamps, a place where every shadow seemed to guard a secret that didn't want to be named, and at the center of it all, the marriage of Bill and the woman he once called home had turned into a minefield laid across ambition, pride, and the fear of losing control. She had once signed a marital addendum binding the management rights of an investment fund linked to the Dupree Foundation, papers that were supposed to be a safety line in a relationship, equal parts partnership and control, but it became the only proof that the border between trust and calculation had been erased long ago. When the financial scandal erupted, pages flipped through the hands of attorneys, auditors, reporters, and the watchful eyes hungry for the scent of blood, and her signature suddenly vanished from the original document, as if an invisible hand had slipped into the archive and pulled the pin from a grenade on their living room floor, turning Bill's rage into a fuse that wouldn't cool. Yet his fury, flaring like a wind-blown blaze, wasn't aimed solely at a betrayal measured by legal standards. It scraped against memories of the times he had seen her stand before the numbers twitching on the screen, calm to the point of coldness, as if his power were merely an advance payment on some other plan running quietly beneath the surface. She understood what burns first in a scandal: not money, but honor, and his honor had always been the hardest currency in this community. So when the signature disappeared, it dragged away more than a clause, it took with it the last pillar holding him above the fog of friend or foe suspicion. As Bill stretched himself thin between the investigation and the unspoken questions echoing in his own head, a camera recording surfaced, icy and unfeeling the way machines always are when they watch human beings show their true nature. She and Andre met in the dark at a parking lot, just before the night Bill exposed Andre's murky past to the community. The image had no sound, but sometimes silence is more expensive than noise. It widens the gaps and invites the worst hypotheses. They stood close enough to suggest an alliance, far enough that any lawyer could call it a coincidence. But no one in Fairmont Crest still believes in coincidence, and she knew every chance meeting here is a stage built to force someone into a choice. The question hovered like a blade at the nape: was she helping Bill trap Andre to neutralize a threat that never truly died, or was Andre helping her push Bill to the cliff's edge, or a man drunk on power would slip by his own supposedly irreversible decisions? Vanessa caught the scent of that power vacuum like a predator catching the trace of a wound. In her hand was another video, raw yet as sharp as a scalpel drawn at the weakest point: Bill's wife signing an emergency power of attorney on a night he was away. Whether it was fear, calculation, or an attempt to keep a sinking vessel afloat, the moment the pen touched paper hammered home an inconvenient truth: there was a time she accepted steering the course of money and influence without the presence of her husband. Vanessa didn't need to throw her into a press conference glare, she only needed to pull out a chair, set the video on the table, and state her demand to testify against a member of the Dupree family. The offer sounded like a fire exit strewn with glass, each step a cut, and by the time you emerged, you'd be breathing but no longer whole. She understood that agreeing meant digging a knife into the root network of power braided across generations, and refusing meant Vanessa would send that video exactly where it could carve open her marriage and, more broadly, her standing in a community that worships polished surfaces above any ethics. But fate doesn't only take the form of recordings, it also disguises itself as old papers sleeping in drawers everyone thought they'd forgotten. A birth certificate surfaced, saying that before marrying Bill, she had a child, and the child's biological father might be the very man who holds Fairmont Crest's insurance contract. Set in the right place, that detail could detonate like a charge planted under the boardroom floor. It wouldn't only ignite a property dispute, it would hollow out the moral foundation Bill used to impose his will. A man like Bill lives on two assets: power in the story that he controls every variable. If his financial and family identity were yanked down from its pedestal by a truth he never knew, every decision he'd made would be reread through a new lens. Was he just a loud voice fronting a domestic theater he never understood, a puppet jerked by strings of contracts, relationships, and late-night signatures? For her, the certificate wasn't a bomb, it was a mirror forcing her to see the road she had chosen. The string of choices that kept her safe while burying pieces of herself, and now, as the child from a previous life suddenly held its face up to the present, the line between protection and manipulation blurred beyond distinction. On the night of the charity gala, the crystal light fell into people's eyes like metallic rain, and Bill, in a rare instant, lost the self-restraint that had become his trademark. Proclamations delivered unilaterally, decisions ignoring dissent, the posture of a man convinced reputation can replace reason, all of it showed like a fissure running the length of porcelain. Danny noticed what everyone else missed, a bottle of pills in her purse and the memory of that final drink before Bill crossed the threshold between authority and loss of control. In a community where whispers can crystallize into indictments, that detail kindled two hostile theories: either she tried to shield her husband, throwing a break to keep him from spilling secrets at the worst moment, or she cleared the path, turning a misstep into a spill, so the record of Fairmont Crest would say he toppled from his chair on his own rather than being dragged down. Cruelty sometimes lies in not choosing, letting uncertainty do the dirty work. But from Danny's vantage point, a woman learning to read the grammar of power from the real faces of people who call themselves benefactors, nothing about that night felt accidental. She gathered the loose shards, the pills, the parking lot footage, the emergency power of attorney, the vanished addendum, the old birth certificate. Pieced together, they formed a maze with no simple exit, where every turn was built of secrecy and the only winner was the one willing to wield truth like a blade on themselves. Inside her, another storm rose. She raged at the way Bill had used love like a bridle, wielded trust like a permit to intrude into the corners of her life, and wielded reputation like a wall to push back outside doubts. But she loathed herself, too, for living so long in the gray that she no longer knew which acts were born of love and which were reflexes of survival. If she truly had signed emergency authority to save an investment that couldn't withstand exposure, was that love wearing the mask of strategy, or strategy wearing the mask of love? If the meeting with Andre was only to verify information before detonation, why hadn't she told her husband? And if that final drink was a desperate attempt to dampen an ugly eruption, why hide the bottle in her purse instead of formalizing it under clinical protocols? Those questions coiled around her like links of a chain, each explanation exposed a new link, dragging her deeper into quicksand. She knew Vanessa stood at the tunnel's end with a deal in disguise. She knew Andre, if sober, would tax silence at a premium. She knew Danny was not only brave but a fast study, which made her the most dangerous competitor in the race to capture the public's trust. In Fairmont Crest, whoever controls the story controls the crowd, whoever controls the crowd decides who is punished and who is forgiven. Meanwhile, Bill was being torn by two opposing forces: on one side, a bruised ego, the tale of a man stripped of dominion in his own house; on the other, the fear of losing a power structure he had invested a career to build. He wanted to punish, expose, crush anyone who dared thread a line through his wealth and name, including the woman who shared his bed. But he also wanted to restructure, to compromise, to freeze all movement long enough to stuff the wholesome memory of a model home back into the public eye. Every decision became a double-edged blade: expose her and he'd shoot himself in the foot before a public that devours marital tragedy; defend her and he'd hand enemies the chance to claim the evidence was smoke of his own making. Rage thus found no exhaust. It drilled into his chest, inflating the urge to control until anyone could see orders unspoken in his stare, the brief clench of his jaw at Vanessa's name, the tightening grip at any mention of Andre, and the long, vacant look sliding over Danny as if she were a stranger he didn't know where to file on the friend info chart. She, at the crossroads of Vanessa, Andre, and Bill, realized the most frightening thing wasn't exposure, it was choosing. Choose complicity to survive or choose truth to be ground to powder. Choose to push someone over the ledge or step into the light and be sniped by 1,000 questions. She began negotiating with herself, arranging the fragments to find a tolerable exchange. If she took Vanessa's deal, she would demand more than survival: a guarantee for the future of the child hidden in that certificate, a path out of the knot binding the linked fund and the Dupree family. If she turned her back on Vanessa, she would need another explosion big enough to redirect the gaze, perhaps dragging Andre into the blast radius with an old file believed dead, or laying out proof that Danny had drifted too close to the ethical line in her effort to save the person she cared about. But every path exacted a non-refundable loss: Bill's trust, the child's future, her position in a community that would never forgive a woman who was both intelligent and pragmatic enough to draw her own escape route. And while she calculated, fatigue rose like a tide, her eyes snagging on the seemingly small detail from the gala: the final drink. Perhaps it was the emblem for every decision she had ever made, a mixture that felt smooth on the tongue while quietly stripping a person's nerve until he became the worst version of himself, so she could both pity and judge him, rescue and shove him. Fairmont Crest stayed awake, windows blinking like eyes, every house an unfinished deposition. When the sun scraped up at the horizon, she knew morning would not purify anything. It would only extend time so the factions could place bigger bets on the outcome of a game no one dared fold. She stood before the mirror and saw a woman who had forgotten how to tell the line between protecting herself and destroying others, between loving a man and loving her place in the story people tell. Questions fell like pebbles to the bottom of a well: who removed the signature, and to restore power to whom? Was the parking lot footage proof of betrayal, or the trace of an attempt to stop an even bigger explosion? Was the emergency power of attorney the knife Vanessa holds to her throat, or the key to an uncharted corridor of negotiation? Would the old birth certificate save a child from becoming a bargaining chip, or shove that child into a hereditary contest it never chose? And that final drink, was it a desperate break or a fateful shove? If she takes one more step, is she moving toward freedom or dropping into a pit already dug for her? If she stays silent, will that silence be a shield or a noose? And if she decides to tell everything, will anyone still be there to hear a truth that leaves no room for mercy? And so, the picture seems to have enough pieces to expose everything, yet the more we fit them together, the more gaps appear. The vanished signature isn't just a legal trace, it feels like someone deliberately pulled the final pin so the system would collapse on its own. The clandestine meeting with Andre isn't merely an exchange of information, it may be the exact moment two arcs of power intersected to create a destabilizing epicenter: the emergency power of attorney video in Vanessa's hands. Isn't just a knife at the throat, it's like a passport that lets her rearrange the board to her liking. The birth certificate revealing a child from before the marriage isn't a moral shock, it's a lever that could snap an empire if applied at the right point. And the pill bottle that surfaced on the night Bill lost his rhythm might not be a plot to poison at all, but an emergency brake misread, or worse, exploited to steer public opinion. We have enough clues to question, but not enough proof to convict, enough motives to suspect, but no confession to close the case. And that keeps Fairmont Crest awake, every window an eye, every whisper an unsigned verdict, every exchanged glance spawning a new hypothesis. If tomorrow Vanessa releases the video, is she aiming to topple or to negotiate? If Andre suddenly reveals the full content of the meeting, is he saving himself or fueling a larger blaze? If the child's biological father truly holds Fairmont Crest's insurance contract, is that a cruel coincidence or a concealed link planted from the start to be detonated on demand? And Bill, the man convinced he can control every variable, will he choose to protect his family by swallowing his rage, or protect his reputation by burning what remains? As for Bill's wife, standing among bunkers built from secrets, will she step into the light and pay for it with the truth, or seal the doors and let others devour each other in suspicion and exhaustion? Perhaps the answer isn't about who's right or wrong, but about the moment they're forced to choose sides, forced to lose something that can't be reclaimed. Every decision carries a price: trading trust for safety, kinship for power, truth for silence. When there are no good options left, people choose the least bad, and that very choice will redefine who they are in this story. So don't rush to a verdict, watch how they move in the coming days: a ledger note quietly altered, a meeting calendar nudged to a new hour, an anonymous call slipping into the wrong inbox, a photo once cropped reappearing in full. Those seemingly small details are where the truth hides, and where the powerful are most careless. If you were Bill, what would you protect first? Your reputation, your power, or the woman who signed documents with you that no one else was meant to see? If you were her, how far would you speak to avoid turning the child into a bargaining chip? If you were Vanessa, would you pass up a chance to reset the order just to keep things from collapsing into chaos? And if you were Andre, would you dare to be burned to expose the hands operating from the dark? Share your thoughts in the comments: who's holding the ace, and who's about to become the next sacrifice? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because when the gates of Fairmont Crest tremble again in the night, we'll be there to connect the dots before someone erases them from the canvas.